You're listening to Around Comics. 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 Comics.
You are listening to Around Comics episode 454. I'm Brian Salazar. With me, as always, is Christopher Niesman, and it is another episode of Under the Influence. This week, we are joined by longtime friend of the show. He's an award-winning and Eisner-nominated author, a comics creator, and an all-around respected comics authority. Dr. Zack Kruse is a scholar of literature and visual media, including comics, films, and television. He is the author of Mysterious Travelers, Steve Ditko, and The Search for a New Liberal Identity from the University of Mississippi Press, and has produced his own comics and strips, Mystery Solved. Zach was the driving force behind the very successful Appleseed Comic-Con and the marketing mind at DCBS and InStockTrades.com, now a resident of the not-so-great state of Wisconsin. Zach is striving to understand why they put brandy in everything. And yes, that was written by Chris. I just had to read it. Hey, what's going on?
Actually, most of it was probably written by Zach, because I just pulled like half of that off of the multiple like college websites that you're on.
Yeah. Yep. That's the stuff. That's the kind of copy they don't pay me to write.
You are, but you know, it's weird. We've just always known. I mean, you're Zach. We going back to when In Stock Trades was a sponsor of Around Comics. We knew you from the retail side of stuff, and now like 16, however many years later, you're like this published authority in comics. It's weird.
Yes. Well, it's important to have dreams and that you don't let people get in your way of living them. So here we are, living the dream.
Yeah.
And you know, and cherishing every moment when I get to find out why brandy isn't everything.
It isn't everything here. So you threw us a real curveball. We reached out to you pretty early whenever we started to think about doing the Under the Influence episodes. It's like, oh yeah, we'll get Zach, because you know we've known him forever, and he knows what he's talking about, obviously.
And he's cheap.
He's cheap. Yeah, didn't take much. I bought you new pornographer tickets.
That
doesn't seem that cheap.
But yeah, we thought you were going to throw us a Steve Ditko comic, and you did not.
I thought about it, but I thought that's too easy.
Yeah,
I thought that's just too easy.
Well, let me ask, if you were going to pick a Ditko issue, what would it be? Or do you want to save that for the next time you're on the show?
I mean, we can do, why not both? So I would pick two. The lowest hanging fruit, but probably a correct choice, is Spider-Man 33. Right? That's a book that changes everything, I think. But also the final issue, the final two issues of Doctor Strange.
Okay, so 3.
Yeah.
So we're going to go Spider-Man number 33.
Yeah, Spider-Man 33, Spider-Man 33, and then the final Doctor Strange issue.
Cool.
Because a lot happens.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more Ditko later, but we're here to talk about the comic that you picked as one of the most influential to you, and you sent us Swamp Thing number 34.
Yes,
by Alan Moore and Steve Bissett and Toddlebon and the whole Swamp Thing crew. So yeah, interesting pick, man. Well, why this one?
So this was the first Swamp Thing comic I read.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So when I was a kid and I was buying comics at the Speedway Flea Market in Fort Wayne, I was just pulling them out and buying them for 25, 15 cents each, maybe 50 cents at the outside. And this just happened to be in a bundle of comics. I thought the cover looked cool. Brought it home and deteriorated, just completely melted, because I had no idea what it was. I was not
How old were you?
Gosh, when I was buying comics at Speedway Flea Market, I would have been like 12, 11.
Okay.
So just pulling stuff out at random. I mean, it's the same time that I'm really finding Ditko too, because that's when those Marvel, not the whatever the loss leaders were for Marvel Masterworks, the single comics, right? So anyway, so I pulled this out of a box at a flea market, brought it home, and just did not understand what I was looking at. It didn't look like anything. It didn't look like anything I had ever seen before in comics. You know, everything that I had seen up to that point was pretty straightforward, like standard Marvel, DC, you know, traditional layouts, house style, you know, Jim Shooter's driving the ship, and whatever Jim wants, that's what we're doing. So, so this was kind of, you know, I didn't know what to do with it, and it just sat in a box for years. And then, you know, I kind of got out of comics like a lot of people do. And when I came back to them in my late teens, I was going through things and I found this one and was attracted to it again because of the cover and remembered it being weird. And then opened it again. And I was like, oh, this is something comics can do.
Yeah.
Right. This is transforming the way that I understand the ways in which this medium can work. And it also made me feel feelings. Right. Because it's, you know, it's not just about sort of, you know, the sexual gratification here, but like there's something very, you know, in some ways kind of hippy dippy type stuff, but like, but there's something about this, about all being one and all being connected and being a part of one another and experiencing our feelings and experiencing and being whole with another person.
It's
Not just being whole with another person, but whole with the universe itself. Right. There's something very sort of pretty about that and very appealing. And it grabbed me again. So it was, I bought this book probably 6 or 7 times. And
oh, wow. Yeah. In different, you know, forms and single issue or collections and
well, I bought it at least 3 times in collections, and I bought it another 3 or 4 times in single issues. And I gave one to my kids, right?
One thing I will say right off the bat is if you're playing along at home and you want to go back and reread this issue, most of the time I'm just like, get it on, you know, the Amazon digital seems to be a pretty easy thing for the Kindle or Hoopla. It is a different book whenever you read it, the tactile version of it. It actually doesn't translate to tablet. I mean, it's okay, but they do a lot of interesting things where you almost have to, you know, read the book and turn it as you read it, and then layouts go from verticals to horizontals, but at 90 degrees to the comic. And so I read it digital, and then I grabbed the reprint, the hardcovers, and took a look at it again today, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have read the digital version.
And I think that was one of the things that was so captivating to me about it, and why I didn't understand it as a I then why I was really excited about it, you know, as a slightly older reader, is the tactile part of it, right? And like turning the book and like moving the whole book with you and trying to sort of like follow the thing. If you're just trying to read it on a computer screen, it loses something. I mean, you can move with your eyes and you can still read it, okay, I guess, but that's not the point. You're supposed to treat it as though it is a sort of magical object that you are moving with, and you're going through that sort of mean type, you know, loop that you see in there, to experience whatever it is that Abby is experiencing on this hallucinogen.
Well, they're showing what you can do with the comics medium, but even a step beyond that, they're showing what you can do with the printed medium. And obviously, you know, there weren't iPads floating around whenever they designed this comic, but you know, it does show that, you know, there are things that you can do in print that just doesn't translate to digital.
Yeah. And it's also things I mean, not only does it not translate to digital, but like, okay, so put it in the context of its moment, mid 80s, right? Like this 5, then it's something that you're not going to get out of other visual mediums either. You're not going to the movies and then like having your chair like rotate around like you're in a Ferris wheel watching the film, you know, as things swirl around. That's an entirely passive experience. It's being projected at you. This is a very active reading experience where you're moving with it and then moving with Abby and moving through the journey and then having to think about all of these, frankly superficial, but still, hard feelings and real feelings that people have about this sort of thing. And that's that. I mean, again, this is what, it put me over the edge for a lot in a lot of ways with comics that I hadn't experienced outside of very other sort of isolated moments.
I was gonna ask, I had a similar experience with this. Initially when I first read this, I was young and didn't really understand much of it. And then one day I did hallucinogenics, and that really kind of, that's what's going on.
That's why Abby was
yeah. But I've 2 or 3 people that I've talked to about this book, just sort of anecdotally, and everyone kind of mentions the fact that they have sex. And I'm like, no, they don't. They don't. That's the whole point, is that he can't. He can't have a physical sexual relationship with her, but he wants to connect with her. He wants to have this communion of their love. And the only way he can do that is to give her a part of his essence, essentially. So he's entering her body with the tuber or whatever. Yeah. But they don't actually physically have sex. It's the idea was, they had this powerful experience that goes beyond just a physical relationship. But but I always found that funny. Like, it seems like whenever people talk about this particular issue, it's like, the one where they have sex. And it's like, well, but they don't actually have sex in it. It's never, they never actually have that because he can't. He physically doesn't have the parts, essentially. But
I checked out the next issue after this, and in the first couple sentences, they refer to them as lovers now.
Yeah, I suppose in their own way. I think that was the point, is that there was a different, there's all kinds of love, and even for a swamp creature that is not man, other than his mind or spirit or whatever you want to call it, they could still find love. I think
this
that was
deeply spiritual connection that
they loved each other, even though it wasn't necessarily physically manifested. That was only part, and I think that was kind of Moore's intention of talking about that's one part of love. That's not the only part of love. And then of course there's the psychedelic part is very interesting, because it's very much I think a lot of people have that same experience on whether it's ayahuasca or mushrooms or whatever it may be, that sort of sense of connection that you don't have walking around, and whatever it is, whatever that it's an interesting thing that a lot of people experience very similar things when taking hallucinogens. So it's
yeah, I kind of reverse engineered that experience too, right? I kind of knew that that's what it was about, it's like, okay, they're on some sort of trip here. But then on the occasion that I had to try a hallucinogenic substance, this comic then took on an additional layer of meaning. It's like,
right,
correct, Steve Bissett and John Totleben.
Now, it's not the first time that someone had consumed a tuber from Swamp Thing. I remember it was, I think, in the first storyline, that who was the bad guy in that?
The corporate, you're talking about
Jason Woodrue?
Yeah.
Woodrue, that he harvested a tuber and ate it, and I don't think it set him on a LSD journey. So I wonder, does he have control of his tubers?
I would think he could,
right?
Depending on, I don't know what a tuber is. What is it? Is that
it's like a
root vegetable?
It's like a root vegetable.
Yeah.
So it's like a sweet potato.
Yeah. I would have thought it would have made more sense if it was like a mushroom, but those all those plants, all the natural hallucinogenics are different types of plants.
Don't panic, man, it's organic.
Yeah, so since he had control over himself, I would imagine he could pretty much install whatever he wants in whatever he creates. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's one of his powers.
Wouldn't that be funny? And you know that Alan Moore has thought about it.
Yeah, sure.
Or it's a manifestation of their internal state, right?
Sure.
Abby is inherently good. And is,
so she gets the good tuber.
Yeah, so she's inherently good and passionate and sincere and cares about these things and wants to be connected with him in a spiritual way. So what does she get out of it? She gets out of it this specific experience, right? If some ne'er-do-well would eat one, then it seems reasonable based on what we have, right, from the other stories. It seems reasonable that manifestation is the opposite for something like Gamma raising the Hulk, right? It's Bruce Banner versus the leader, whatever the leader's real name is.
Well, yeah, and that's always been sort of the thing. Drugs just kind of bring out who you really are. Yeah. Mostly cocaine. That was, if you're an asshole, you're going to be. Wasn't that a Eddie Murphy joke? It's like if you're an asshole, you're just going to be a bigger asshole on cocaine. It's not going to make you an asshole. It's going to bring out who you are.
Kind of fucked up that bear though.
Yeah. That was, the last 10 minutes of that movie were really funny. Another thing that I guess I really like about this issue is not okay. So like there's the theoretical, there's like the intellectual stuff. Like okay, like they're bonding. It's a different kind of lovemaking. It's a spiritual love, and so on and so forth. But and we kind of talked about this already. But I just think visually, what they're doing in this comic that is really pretty widely read is outrageous.
Like,
this is outrageous for a mainstream comic. This didn't come out of like a magazine publisher, like this isn't some black and white boom book. I mean, this is a book from DC.
It's Vertigo. It's Vertigo at this point, which does have an
adult. No, it's still DC. It's still
DC. When did it become Vertigo?
Or much later.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they had like a mature reader's tag on it, but it's not Vertigo yet.
Okay.
So this is a mainstream, DC book. And it's doing really outrageous and inventive things and challenging readers to sort of establish what they think about comics.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
challenging the publisher to say, does this have a place in our imprint? I bet it's about this time that they're probably like, okay, we got to put this under a different tag.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and Karen Berger's there. I mean,
Berger.
I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I have no idea. But I have to imagine issues like this one, are ammo for Karen Berger to say, like, no, we just need an imprint where we can do just this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Because this is totally different from whatever, Mike Barr and, or whoever else is doing it on the Flash. Right. It's not the same. And it's not the same as what's happening in Batman or, anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, though, it was like canceled before Alan Moore and those guys, you know what I mean? Like Rick, it was pretty low sales, which is, I think, what led to them being able to kind of push boundaries and do whatever they wanted. Because it's Saga. Who cares about Swamp Thing? Nobody. That book doesn't sell anyway. But also, I think, or I guess I have a question. Do you think, like, because Vertigo was that sort of, and the British invasion of the writers, Moore and all those guys that came over and started working her, like their sensibilities were much different growing up in, not in America and having a much more, I think, mature look at storytelling or a much more open perspective than maybe us in the US would have for comic books and what you could do with them or what what kinds of stories. And do you think that had sort of an underlying effect on like creating Vertigo just because of that British sort of perspective?
Probably, but also, I mean, you guys that are sort of chiefly involved in that between Moore and Morrison are, also really into drugs
and magic. And,
magic. But they're Scottish and English and I think that Vertigo ended up being, I mean, Neil Gaiman, right?
Mm-hmm.
It ended up being a good landing spot, and that doesn't happen without Swamp Thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's not even remotely close to possible without this. So You know, I guess another thing that I like about this was, so there's the visual element about this, but you know, I kind of poke at it a little bit for the hippy dippy type stuff, but again, like in a sea of comics that are about, you know, violence and superhero stuff, and frankly, whether intentional or not, you know, fairly right wing, like in their worldview, right? Like this is also a very nice sort of like counterpoint to all of that.
Yeah.
In a mainstream comic, right? It's not about anything other in this moment. There's a spiritual communion, this connection between the two of them.
For one issue, Swamp Thing changes from being a horror comic to being a romance comic.
Yeah, and not just and not just a romance comic, but like a romance comic that is positing the cosmos itself.
Yeah.
Right, like
hippy dippy romance comic.
right. Yeah, we are all one. We are all connected. You are my brother. You're, you know, like. But not only are we brothers, but we are literally one. And whatever it is that you feel and suffer, and whatever your pleasures are, and your triumphs and your tragedies, all of those things that you experience, I too share. Right, and like that's. I mean, that's stuff that's like straight out of like, you know, Carl Sagan's Cosmos,
Mm-hmm.
a very romantic view of humanity and life and all of these things. It's very like, it's really affirming, right? In total opposition to what is going to come out of more, you know, in the next year or two.
Where basically people are horrible.
Yeah, everyone sucks. Everything sucks. The worst of us is Richard Nixon, and it just goes down from there, right? So, you know, it's a very lovely, pleasant counterpunch to all of that kind of stuff. Because the best comics of the 80s are not about how cool and great human existence is.
No.
Right? They're just not. This is right. But we achieve that sort of that sense of humanity through.
He's probably working on Watchmen about this time.
Surely. Yeah, well, he starts writing Watchmen in like 83.
Yeah, so this is well into that. So yeah,
this came out in 85, so this issue, I think.
Yeah, this came out in 85, so Watchmen was 86.
Yeah. So, you know,
the year of comics.
It's an amazing.
It's like the year of comics.
Yeah, it is the year, like full stop.
Yeah.
So, you know, that this is happening within that year as this sort of counterbalance to all of those things that fanboys sort of drool over. Like, you know, there was another way of thinking about things, and it's not. It's a very peculiar and distinct way of doing it. So you know, because of that kind of stuff, like with all of that sort of context in mind, so like going back and reading this as like an angsty teenager who's just obsessed with Watchmen and like, oh, I like grim and gritty things, and I like violence and bloody things, and oh, are there boobs in it? Oh, that's gonna be good, right? To reapproach a comic like this, like it's just totally changed my mindset about everything, about what the medium can do, but just like who I was as a reader and like what I really wanted all of these out of these things. Did I want something grim and gritty all the time, or am I looking for something else too? Right. Yeah. And I thought I really think that this was just like a key moment in all of that. So
yeah, I think that it still can have that effect on people even today. You know, what are we, almost 30 years on? I had a question from Nick Lindsay. He asked what absolute volume is this issue in? I don't know the absolutes, but in the hardcover reprints, it is book 2. It's the last story in book 2.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And that's the second version I bought it in, and I really like those hardcover reprints. They've got the first one. They didn't do it through all of them, but the first one's got that really nice sort of tacky feel to
the cover.
Yeah,
and then they changed the stock on the covers. Yeah. Still pisses me off. Yeah. I'm still really, angry about that. Don't change your trade dress in the once you set it. It's
Yeah, I want to feel it. That's why I bought it this way. I want to feel it.
But thankfully, it follows like the Kirby omnibuy, in that it actually is like a high grade newsprint that it's printed on. So It even kind of smells like old book, you know.
Yep.
It's fantastic reprints on those. That was actually not never. I had read a few issues here and there, but I had never read the Swamp Thing story until those really nice hardcover reprints came out, and that was really the first time I sat down and did it. So
I think that was true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right, because those paperbacks they've been sort of like easing those paperbacks out of print for a while, so you couldn't really get them or get a whole set, and then they finally started putting out those hardcovers, and those are beautiful, and they go all the way up through the Rick Veitch stuff.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. It's it's weird because for me age wise, I was like 12 when this was coming out, 13 when Watchmen comes out. But I was such a Marvel kid that Watchmen and DKR may have been the first DC books I ever bought. And so I never read Swamp Thing because it was a DC character.
Yeah.
And I think that there's probably, more than a few people out there that were the same. I mean, we're at a time now where, I don't think it matters one way or the other. There's great comics that have come out from both companies, and then tons of other indie stuff. But yeah, I think there was a little bit of a DC Marvel divide at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean, and outside of stuff with outside of Spider-Man and Secret Wars, like when I was a like a little kid, I don't know what Marvel books I was reading outside of Spider-Man. I mean, I had all the Spider-Man. I had like Spider-Man picture books and book and record sets. But I was reading Batman and the Flash, and that was it. And then, like I said, I stumbled on this in a lot of things when I was like in 4th or 5th grade, a few years later. But yeah, I think that's true though, right? Like it was entirely possible to be oblivious to what was happening at another publisher because you just bought all of what one publisher had.
And also for my age, it took me a long time to get used to the art in Swamp Thing. For 12 or 13-year-old Chris, probably not the most appealing art in the world. I've obviously grown to appreciate it a lot more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't slick enough, for when it was coming out for me to pay attention to it because I'm a dummy.
Well, I think that's true for more people. I think there are more people that's true for than would likely admit it. Right? Like, how many times have we encountered people like, well, I don't like old comic book art. Well, what do you mean by old? Well, I don't like Jack Kirby. You don't like Jack Kirby. Well, you, sir, are an idiot.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But there's plenty else. It's like, oh, let me introduce you to Wally Wood.
I don't like Jack Kirby.
You don't like Jack Kirby.
I appreciate Jack Kirby, but I don't like reading Jack Kirby comics.
You, sir, are an idiot.
That may be.
We've got.
I've never really argued that point, Zach.
Well, I don't actually care. I can't imagine being angry at someone for having different tastes than.
No.
I mean, I don't think I would never sit here and say Jack Kirby's like. I appreciate everything Jack Kirby has done in
you
comics
recognize his place in comics history.
Absolutely. And at that time, like there was nothing like it. And so I understand people's fascination with it. Me personally, I don't really enjoy going through like 60s Jack Kirby comics. But I don't really enjoy going through 60s comics of anybody's that much. So, but yeah. That being said,
that's all right. That's a thing though, and like, so I think that's something that like people, once they learn about these things though, like it's hard for them to come to grips with that and admit it to other people.
Well,
they're cowards and they're just worried that they're not.
I think, in some ways, I think Alan Moore is partly responsible for that. He changed comics. He brought a very literary, approach to writing comics and to, grow up on that, then to go back and read, like early Ditko or Kirby work. Yeah, it's so far and so removed from what we grew up on, and a lot because of Alan Moore and Frank Miller and several other people.
Yeah, well, I think the thing about this is like this particular run on Swamp Thing, but and later with Watchmen and with more on Batman and on Daredevil, both titles. I think what happens there, and you're saying this too, is that they're intellectualized for a new audience that hadn't experienced intellectualized comics. That's not to say that comics weren't intellectual before this; they were, right? But like these hit at the right moment with the right generation of people who had the time and the disposable income and knew what they were doing and didn't treat these things as ephemeral.
I think probably for the first time, because it's 86, this is probably the first time that adult comics are reaching an educated adult audience.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, I think that's exactly right.
I mean, for me, like I had read comics probably starting around 10 years old, but I was much more of a like science fiction and fantasy novel reader because I was just into that and Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of stuff.
Dragonlance.
Yeah, way more. So when this stuff hit, Alan Moore was like, Alan Moore and Frank Miller stuff was like, oh, wait a second, there's guys that actually write this stuff, like kind of like a novel, like or more characterization. So that was all of a sudden like I was mainlining that kind of stuff, and the that 80s stuff was just like it was the right time for me. I was 14 in 1985, and it was just like I wasn't really looking for that much superhero comics at that time, but Daredevil with ninjas, like and that kind of stuff, and like Greek tragedy sort of romantic stuff, and that certainly captured my attention much more than like the traditional superhero stuff.
Yeah, as good as like Teen Titans was at that time. It's a different thing.
Yeah, it was just not what I was into. I mean, I read some of it certainly, but I never gravitated toward that much.
Yeah, see, I mean, I'm a little bit younger, but like I didn't give any kind of a crap about Teen Titans ever until I was in my early 20s. Going back and finding like collections of,
and that's whenever you get to a point where you're chasing an artist or comics that you're gonna like if you go back and read them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that was another and like I said, that's another reason why I picked this one. I didn't go looking for this. It was complete happenstance. Like it just happened to be in that particular dealer's box that day, and I grabbed a stack of comics because my grandma was telling me we got to go. You're gonna get, and I just took over whatever was in my hand.
I'll take it.
That day forward, I had this Swamp Thing comic and a whole stack of John Byrne West Coast Avengers.
Nice.
And then a handful of other things that God knows what they were or where they are now. But those West Coast Avengers in this one are the only ones I remember. And which is saying something, because they're weird, right? The West Coast Avengers stuff is weird in a different way, but this was just such an amazing experience, right? And it's one, like when I teach comics, this is an example I use to help students understand like sort of the potential and the possibilities of this is what the medium can do, right? Like you don't have to read any issue of Swamp Thing before this. You don't have to read any issue after this. This is a complete unit of a story and an experience that you can talk about and intellectualize and think through and have feelings about without the baggage of 50 years of continuity or whatever the hell thing or whatever sort of dark imagination you have about what you must know about superheroes in order to understand them, which is total nonsense. Right?
So you're teaching this to like 21-year-olds, basically. How is it received? What's the feedback on? Really positive? Really positive, like super positive all the time. Like, every now and like whenever you teach anything, like nothing is, you're never batting 1,000. You're not. They're 19 to 21. You're just not going to bat 1,000. But I would say 80% of the time it works every time. So it hits with the overwhelming majority of students because it's unusual.
because I asked them to read it in a physical format, and because we talk through, okay, so don't worry about what came before or after this, but just worry about the feelings in the story that the feelings that you have for this story right here. How does it make you? How do you respond to this? And that they have responses at all is then the thin edge of the wedge to talk about, like, okay, well, why did you have that reaction? What in the comic precipitated that reaction? Well, it was the fact that I've never seen anything like this before. It was that it made me feel feelings about the environment. It was about this trip. It was that I had to move the pages around to read them and understand them. It was that the golden mean exists throughout the entire comic, and you're just constantly spiraling around in this perfectly calculated geometric pattern, right? Like whatever it is that they get from their background and experience, like almost the overwhelming majority gets something, which is all I want. I was like, I don't care if you like it, and don't tell me about how much you like it or dislike it. I don't care. It's none of my business. What I want to know is, do you understand it? And they seem to, which is great.
Yeah, it's this is not a comic that was mailed in so they could meet deadline.
No.
there's and those comics are out there, and that's fine. No,
do you get
this does something special?
Do you get a sense from your overall students, like, why the majority of them take your class? Like, do they have an interest in comics, or do they think it's like a blow-off class, or like what is their goal, or what is their reason for taking a comic book class?
So I think for the majority of them, there is a genuine interest in comics, like because there's something to hold on to. Like if I say, like, this is American literature from 1935 to 1985, like nobody's signing up for. They're like, I don't know. You're gonna have to read words, and there's gonna be books, and those books are gonna be longer than 12 pages.
Right.
But if I say it's a class on comics, then they all have some kind of baseline knowledge about what comics are.
Yeah.
It might be different. They might be thinking about manga. They might be thinking about Marina Telmeyer. They might be thinking about superheroes or whatever. But
thank goodness that there are that many touch points.
Right. Yeah. So there's lots of yes, touch points is a good way to put it. So there's lots of different touch points there that they can hold on to. So that gets me a lot of buy-in. However, what I would say is that even though I get that buy-in from that very real place, the majority of them also take it as like, oh, I'm not actually going to have to do any real reading. This isn't serious. And then they get to the class and like, oh, fuck.
God damn you, Alan Moore.
You didn't know.
Yeah. You didn't know what you all were getting into. You didn't know in the class. You thought it was some scrub. No. I'm going to make you feel feelings, and we're going to talk about this.
I want to take your class.
You should. It's fun.
Can you do it online?
Not right now.
Not right now. Okay.
Not right now. It's everything's.
I'm not driving to Green Bay.
No, to do that. That's an hour.
It's like two. It's 2 for me. 2.5.
2 degrees. Well, to Sheboygan though.
Yeah.
So I teach most of my in-person classes in Sheboygan. So.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a kindness. It was a kindness extended to me. So, so anyway, but yeah, like a lot of them think it's going to be very simple. Then they find out, oh, it's not. But it's the same thing that happens in film classes. Like my film, the same way. Like, oh, I'm just going to sit and watch movies. Well,
you're gonna have to do some thinking.
Yeah, you're gonna have to do some thinking, and then I'm gonna make you see things that you don't unsee. So how about that? Right? Don't tell mom and dad about this one. So
speaking of, that's a good segue to a question I had for you guys. So I haven't read this issue in quite a while. It's been a few years at least since I've read it. And as you evolve and as sort of the world evolves and your thoughts and ideas on how people behave changes. As I was reading this issue, I noticed like when he first gives her the tuber, he doesn't tell her what it is, and I'm like, he's roofing her. I mean, it kind of is. I'm like, I get it. Like, there's a trust there because they love one another, but it's like, you could kind of like, I would never hand someone LSD and not tell them what it was. I
You
wouldn't
know that if that issue comes out now, there is an entire Twitter war about whether he roofied her or not.
It was just an interesting little thing of like, oh, that's, you know, I mean, it certainly was not Alan Moore's intention. And, you know, Alex is a kind, thoughtful, you know, as the kindest person in DC Comics, maybe at that time. So certainly that's not his intention, but it's just like reading it now today, you know, it is an 80s comic, and that kind of thing was, you know, as we've come to see, much more prevalent in the 80s and for more.
It isn't audible consent.
Yeah, right? It's interesting. Yeah.
But, you know, Christ gave the disciples his body. I mean,
was there audible consent?
He said, "This is my body."
Did it get him high though?
Well, I mean, look.
They saw God, so
there are out there, right? So there are kooks out there who think that, and I'm saying kooks because I know enough about critical biblical studies to know that these people are not taken seriously. But there's books out there like John Allegro's The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross that claims that Christianity started out as a hallucinogenic mushroom cult.
Oh, sure.
Right. And take this kind of stuff very seriously. So eating the body of Christ is to eat of the sacred mushroom. So
well, I've definitely heard the argument like the burning bush. Why would you see a burning bush? Well, if you're on hallucinogens, you've probably seen a burning bush before.
Right. But it's Allegro's argument is really weird and complicated and not very good. If you take more than 5 seconds to think about it, like, well, he doesn't actually understand ancient languages, but okay, don't worry about that. But in general, though, like this notion that eating of the body is to participate in a hallucinogenic experience where you see God and become one with the universe is not new or unique.
Yeah,
right.
Right. So the consent thing's there, but also on the other hand, it's also there's like a history of people who thinking about religion in the 70s who said, yes, this is religion.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly, I don't know. I don't want to get into a religious debate necessarily, but
I don't either. I'm just saying that's a book that a guy wrote that's very popular.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And you know that is there with Alan Moore, and it's got to be, you know,
he was a snake god.
Yeah, I mean that is where he's drawn this from.
Right.
Well, I think Swamp Thing is a very like figure throughout Moore's, you know, just the resurrection of Alex from the Earth. You know, I mean that whole thing. But I think that's very common in a lot of Moore's work. Is you know that same
Christ figure.
Yeah, Christ-like.
Figure. Oh yeah, totally Christ-like figure. He's like Cool Hand Luke, right?
Yeah.
But
go ahead. Oh no,
eat a lot of eggs.
Loved eggs. Big egg guy. Huge egg guy. I
think there's room for 2 more.
Mm-hmm. That's right. You can do 2 more, right? And then he's going to pass out and he's going to lay on that picnic table. And then George Kennedy's going to come over and look down at him, right? And he's going to be laying there, you know, with his hands out.
George Kennedy was what, Peter?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just heard a good story about Paul Newman. It was an interview with Robert Redford, and there was a news story out saying that Redford didn't have a sense of humor, and it was in reference to a practical joke that Paul Newman had pulled on him. And Redford told the story. He's like, well, Paul's a huge race fan, and sometimes, you know, you talk to him, I love him, but he starts talking about racing, and you start getting bored if you're not as big a race fan as he is. He starts to be kind of boring. So I was renting a house in Connecticut or somewhere, wherever he was living at the time, and it was really close to Paul Newman, and he was somewhere around the town. He found a wrecked like 1964 Porsche, and so he had it wrapped and delivered to Newman's house for his birthday, and you know, just as a joke, this wrecked, you know, Porsche, and Newman never said anything about it. He didn't mention it. And Redford's like, what the fuck? Like weeks go by, and all of a sudden he comes home and the Porsche had been crushed down into like a cube, and put on a pallet and put inside Robert Redford's house.
Hilarious.
So he's like, okay, all right. So then like 3 weeks later, whatever, he has a sculptor melt the thing down into a garden sculpture and delivers it back and puts it in Paul Newman's garden. And they never mentioned it to one another. They refused to acknowledge the fact that they were doing this to each other the whole time. And I'm like, that's the coolest, like that's the greatest sort of
That's some
of,
high-end Hollywood shit right there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just like the best use of expendable income and fame, and you know what I mean? Like,
it's like, oh yeah, a guy to crush a car. I got a guy.
Yeah, I got a guy to just come and turn a car into a garden statue.
He's in charge of craft services.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Zach, I think it's we got time to talk about some other stuff. I just want to say that I really appreciate you bringing Swamp Thing number 34 to the table. It was really cool to go back and reread it and kind of rediscover what a great issue this is.
Yeah, I love it. It's one that I would give anybody who's not read comics or not really wild about comics. I would give it to them. I really would.
Nice.
Yeah.
Have you taught this particular issue or an arc of Saga of the Swamp Thing?
Yep, I teach this exact issue.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Usually my time is really limited, so I give them this exact issue, and then we talk through what it is, and I put it like in the context of the environmentalist movement, and to give them some sort of framework, but then also ask them to think about just what it's doing visually and artistically. Right. And how it's trying to intellectualize comics in a way that they're probably not prepared for.
We barely really touched on the visual. I mean, visually, it's maybe some of the best work of the series.
Oh,
honestly. When they get into the psychedelic, experience that she's having and the things she's seeing, and then, what she's kind of going through, it's like that all of a sudden, man, it turns into a different book, and it just explodes visually.
Yep, it does.
Yeah, and we keep talking about Alan Moore. And I think we kind of have to, stop and say that. I mean, this is as much Bassett and what Tattlebaum as it is Moore.
Oh yeah, and by the way, just a quick plug: the cover artwork is still missing.
No kidding, and it's a beautiful. Who did the cover? Was
Steve
it?
Bassett.
It was Bassett. It's a beautiful cover.
Yeah, it was stolen and is still missing.
No kidding. Oh my god! So someone's got it hanging up in their, basement.
That'll be in an estate sale at some point because that dude is still single.
Yep.
That's funny.
Every once in a while.
True.
Every once in a while. Hey, we did have a couple questions pre-show here. Nick Lindsay was asking about our opinion on some current events, and I actually didn't even know. Joe Quesada got hired by Amazon.
Oh, is he going to be shipping stuff out? Is he? What?
He's driving.
Driving
fork truck.
Yeah.
So no, I actually didn't know about that. So Nick, we'll take a look. I did see that Ike Perlmutter got fired from Disney as the Marvel
Entertainment.
Head of Marvel Entertainment, and Marvel Entertainment, and then the movie stuff is separate, right?
Right. Well,
it was, and now it's not, and so they said you're a redundant, and so they canned him. I have no opinion on it. I did see a lot of creators on Facebook that seemed happy that he's no longer going to be there.
Yeah. I don't think that there's a handful of people like, oh, well, is this the end of Marvel? No.
Is this the end of
one guy?
No, it is not. No, it's just getting folded into a different unit. Marvel Comics is an IP farm. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah, there's many billions of dollars later from those movies that could honestly fund the publishing arm for centuries.
Right. Yeah. No, they're fine.
Yeah.
They're fine. The sky is not falling.
Yeah. There was an NPR show that talked about IPs, and it was an ongoing series, and they were going to create a comic book, and they go shopping around for IPs, and they talk to the people at Marvel, and Marvel has a 100% strict rule that they do not sell any of the IPs that they own. And the reason why, as it was explained in that show, was Groot.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
you never know what's going to take off, what's going to hit.
Yeah.
Yep. That's correct. That is correct.
Yeah.
I mean, just the Guardians of the Galaxy in general, that entire group, like who would have thought, that they would have
Rocket Raccoon.
Yeah.
It was a joke character whenever we were growing up. Zach, go ahead. Before we finish up here, can you walk us through the last 4 or 5 years of your comic life, and where you're living now and all that, and catch people up, because I think it's an awesome story.
Yeah. Okay. So wow. Okay. So 2015, I put Appleseed, my convention, on hiatus, right? I put it on hiatus, and went to grad school at Michigan State to get my PhD in visual media and American studies. Michigan State, they folded their American studies programs for basically political reasons. But before they folded that, they were top 4 in the country for American studies, ahead of Yale, or neck and neck with Yale. So I went there because they had a really amazing American studies program, and they had a lot of scholars that I wanted to work with as it related to my interest on comics. And they also have the largest public collection of comics in the world. And I got to know the librarian there, Randy Scott. The man was in the Weathermen and then went into the library system and created the largest collection of. Anyway, story. He went from the Weathermen and the Days of Rage in '68 to, I'm going to be a librarian. Okay, so anyway, so I went there, worked on my dissertation on Steve Ditko. That I sold that as a book before I finished my PhD in 3 years. And hung around MSU for a little while, mostly because of COVID. And then, a few other hijinks ensued. And now I'm at University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, doing the same thing that I've always done in terms of comic studies, film studies, that sort of thing. I'm also the second vice president of the Comic Studies Society, which is the international organization for the study of comics. And that means that I will be the president in 2 years. So it's just a succession thing. You're elected the second vice president, you become vice president. It goes from there. I ran the MSU Comics Forum when I was at MSU. I mean, I did a lot of stuff. I published a lot in comics. I published a lot of critical stuff in comics. I have an article coming up on our friend Jim Terry's book. Jim,
great.
I wrote an article about Jim's book, Come Home Indio. So anyway, I've been doing that stuff for a long time. And then Mysterious Travelers, my dissertation come book project, got nominated for an Eisner. And even before it got nominated for an Eisner, it immediately found traction with the Ditko estate and the family at this Ditko's family. They read it and said, yes.
Really? Okay. Is that kind of what started that relationship?
Yeah. So I sent it off to a couple of family members while we were still doing the proofs and everything. And they said, yeah, you understand Uncle Steve. You get my brother in a way that people don't. So because of that, I established a relationship with them and become pretty good friends with several members of the family, which is, I hold, dear to my, I'm very grateful for their kindness and their friendship. And it's just, they've never been anything but kind to me. And because of that, I've been working through a lot of Steve's effects and his papers and his library and the things he left behind. And coming out of that will be another book project.
That's awesome.
about his work, and we have some other things. We have irons in the fire too, some rather big irons in the fire that I don't think I should talk about right now, but are coming for sure. So it's been amazing.
It's really cool. I mean, you're expanding knowledge on one of the most important and influential creators in the history of the medium, and that's important work. That's really cool, man.
Yeah,
And it's awesome that you followed a passion and it's led you here. Like, that's the really awesome thing, I'm sure, for you, just to be able to know that, hey, that you turned something that at one time I'm sure was kind of a hobby and now is your profession, and that's awesome.
yeah, and I've watched enough movies about artists to be naive enough to think that that's real. I've seen Ed Wood 100 times. I've seen any number of David Lynch movies about the auteur and so on and so forth. To know to let me put it simple. I always knew where this was. And then I knew where this one was too, right? For people, both of my middle fingers, I knew where both of those middle fingers were always. So it was just a matter of using them to their fullest potential and just doing things the way that I thought was right. And that's worked out really amazingly. I get to do these beautiful things. I get to go hang out with the Ditkos on a weekend. I spend a weekend in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, up in the mountains in Cambria country, hanging out with Steve's brother, right? Like, okay,
That's cool.
wake me up, right?
Yeah.
And and it's beautiful. It's really beautiful, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Bud, thank you so much for guesting with us.
My pleasure. I love you.
Like I said, you were at the the top of the list, of people that we knew that we wanted to talk to early on in this. Sal, do we have any other housekeeping?
I don't think so. No, just the same old www.aroundcomics.com. You can email us at info@aroundcomics.com, and
You know what we do
all
have
those places.
that's different? We actually have some scheduled episodes coming up. Should we give people a heads up on what's coming up and give them a chance to read
No.
some issues? How about next week? Just next week.
Okay, fine.
Okay, next week, this is available on Amazon Kindle if you want. It is Fantastic Four Annual number 6. It is the first appearance of Annihilus. It is the birth of Franklin Richards, and it was incredibly influential to Hilary Barta.
Oh, Hillary.
Yeah, our old friend Hill.
I miss Hillary.
Well, tune in next week.
I will,
and you'll be able to listen to Hill. And if you join the live stream, you can text questions to him, and I'm sure he would love to hear from people. Hill has awesome stories about comics,
and just a great person.
Oh, he's a great guy.
Yeah. My favorite curmudgeon. Do you guys want to see what I've been doing while we've been talking here?
Oh, that's cool.
I decided to try and double down on doing this because I'm like, I have my Cintiq here. I'm just going to start drawing as we're bullshitting, just to kind of multitask, maybe a little bit at least.
It's very Swamp Thingy.
Yeah, a little Swamp Thing.
Nice.
Sketch. Yeah, something like that. I think I'm gonna do more of these as we do these episodes, because it's like we're talking about one thing and I can hopefully multitask a bit and not talk as much. Try not to talk as much.
I like it. And then you can post them episode art. All right. Well, Zach, thank you once again. I'll see you May 4th, New Pornographers.
Yes.
May the 4th be with you.
It will be.
We can talk about our shared Wisconsin experience then. Sal, we'll be back. Film Force 5 episodes. Happy opening day. I think the Film Force 5 Top 5 Baseball Movies podcast landed today in celebration of opening day.
That's right.
So remember, every week you can check out Sal and Will and usually me on the Film Force 5 podcast.
Except for those weeks that I forget to post an episode.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
Life gets in the way. Other than that, we will be back next Thursday. Tom is back from vacation. We're going to have Hillary Barta talking about Fantastic Four annual number 6.
No idea.
Also, don't forget, Midnight Nation is our trade talk for the month. We'll be talking about that, I believe, on April 20th or so. So we'll be back on Thursday. In the meantime,
In between time,
we'll be everywhere in
and
around
around comics.
It's beautiful.